Senator, look, on a matter closer to home for the Coalition, news poll, can it get any worse? Like, do you feel you've bottomed? I've spoken to some of your colleagues from the Conservative wing of the party and they're getting mixed signals. They say there's no hint of panic with the Prime Minister, and they thought Labor seemed relatively despondent and low-key in the House this week. And you know, question time's always interesting theatrics. But those numbers are starting to get into a real trend, aren't they?
Opinion polls, as they always say, come and go. You do look at the trends. You do see if they start setting. But I've been around during the Howard era. We had worse opinion polls for quite some time. And then when people fully concentrate on asking the question, who is best to lead the government for the economic recovery from COVID, who is best to provide the defence for our country, namely nuclear submarines, when they focus their mind, they do tend to drift back towards us. That said, we need to take into account what the people are saying in the polls and pay them due respect and acknowledge that we've got work to do to win their confidence back.
And Senator, you must have been aware of Peter Credlin's fairly searing critique of the government published in The Australian yesterday, and no doubt as a senator with duty electorates and you get around widely, those arguments must be familiar to you from some of the party's base.
I can indicate that which Peter Credlin wrote is something that I get in the grassroots feedback on a fairly regular basis. These wake-up calls from people such as Peter Credlin are always good. I recall Shane Stone once indicating that he was picking up that the Howard government was seen as being tricky. And that got taken to heart, dealt with, and we won the next election. So it is important when these messages come out, be it from a Shane Stone or a Peter Credlin, that they're not dismissed, that they're taken to heart, and you respond accordingly and regain the trust of the Australian people. And
give me a couple of hills upon which you want to pitch your stand, Senator, because I think this is the point Peter made, is people are wondering what the Prime Minister does stand for. I know where you stand on matters of faith, for instance. Will the Religious Freedom Bill see the light of day and be enacted in this Parliament? That was a pretty solemn pledge last time round, as was, by the way, not going zero net emissions. And I think people are starting to ask what the PM genuinely believes in. Give me your pitch of what you'd be prepared to say in the party room are the bottom line issues to take to the people.
Well, what I would look, the bottom line issues for the people are these. Number one, we always have to have a proper defence posture, and that is something that during the 6 years of Labor completely neglected. We have upped the ante in that regard. We are providing funding, new technology with nuclear submarines. We're talking about the economic recovery after COVID, and interesting, whilst the damning opinion poll that you've just been talking about, that same poll indicated that the Australian people overwhelmingly believed that Scott Morrison and the Liberal Nationals were the best to lead us out of the COVID recession and difficulties for the future with the economic recovery. I think Minister Tudge is taking a very good stand in relation to the national curriculum. Minister Peter Dutton has got rid of a lot of the political corrected woke nonsense within the Department of Defence. So there are a lot of product differentiations that we can show. And even with 2050, and it'd be fair to say I've got some misgivings about the target and how we achieve it, but at least the Prime Minister is saying we will achieve this by technology and not taxation. And Labor want to legislate it so you've got a linear approach to it rather than allowing technology to organically help change our energy mix. So look, all that said, I think we have a good story to tell, and at the end of the day, in politics, you've got to be better than your opponents, and at the moment, And I think as we lead into the election, when the Australian people really do focus and say, look, yeah, the government has annoyed us on this, annoyed us on something else, but you know what? We're not going to jump out of the frying pan into the fire. And if we vote for Labor under Albanese and then get a Green coalition with Labor, that would be so much worse. And the Liberals overall, with their national colleagues, are doing an okay job in comparative terms. So, look, I think we can still win the next election. My point of view is we need to win the next election for the sake of Australia, and so that's what I'll be seeking to dedicate my time to. But do we have a task ahead of us? Without doubt.
And I guess, look, the issue, and I know you're not alone amongst members of the Conservative wing of the Liberal Party. I think the gallery missed the story by focusing exclusively on the National Party. I've spoken to a number of your colleagues who are very, very concerned. So far, all we've seen is rhetoric, and the one job that appears to have been improved is that of Keith Pitt. When will this be a digestible plan? So the world leaders at Glasgow are going to hear about this before your party room and before the Australian people. Senator, do you think that's an unfair criticism to make? And when are we going to see a roadmap against which Anthony Albanese's prospects can be judged as well?
The Labor Party have tried to suggest that which is our plan is a pamphlet. In fact, it is a 100-plus page document, so there is some substantial substance in it, and that is what the Prime Minister is promoting as being our road to net zero. Now, I have some issues in relation to the whole debate. That said, I think the world has moved to a large extent. India's on board, South Korea, Japan, all our like-mindeds are going down this track as well, and that leaves us in a particularly difficult position. But what we don't want to do is set in concrete a target for 2030 like Labor has, which will have huge costs to our economy and to jobs. And I think that we can transition with the right technology. And I note you've just put up wind power and the solar panels. You know the argument, don't you? There is one solution to all this, and it's uranium, and we've got to go nuclear. Yeah.
And do you think there's growing sentiment in the party room for that, Senator? In that, I think Tony Abbott belled that cat again when he wrote a very powerful piece a couple of weeks back saying that the acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines would inevitably lead to a nuclear industry in Australia. I certainly would support that, and I think there's probably a lot of the quiet Australians might as well.
I've always been supportive of nuclear energy, and I think it's the way to go. There has been a lot of community resistance to it for whatever reason. You have a look at France, you have a look at the Scandinavian countries, Germany, etc. They've had nuclear power now for a long, long time without any issues. Australia can do the same. But there has been reluctance within the community. I've been taking the pulse in relation to the nuclear submarines, and I have been heartened by the fact that people are saying, yes, this is modern technology, of course we ought to be adopting it, and there seems to be strong community support for Prime Minister and Minister Dutton's decision in relation to nuclear submarines. I think there is a changing sentiment where people are saying, look, we need reliable energy, we need baseload energy, and if we can, let's reduce our emissions as well. How do you get regular supply and affordable supply, all those characteristics that I just indicated, and I think it's got to be nuclear. And the quicker we start moving down that path, the better for Australia and our future.
Well, you've summed that argument up very well, Senator. I hope the Prime Minister was maybe tunes in and puts you on the stump in a few states apart from Tasmania.